Welcome to Maritime, Pakistan, your gateway to the fascinating world of oceans and the opportunities they present to every one of us. Our goal is to explore the shared heritage of the seas to achieve global prosperity. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating chapter from the book The Sea in History, the Ancient World, all about the Amerindian occupation of the Antilles. You know, when we look at a map, we see land, and the sea is just the blue stuff in between, right? A border? But what if for an entire civilization, the sea wasn't a barrier at all, but the very center of their world?
We tend to think history is written in stone, on land. We see islands as these lonely, isolated dots on a map. But this powerful quote from the Nobel laureate Derek Walcott, well, it challenges us to throw that idea overboard. He suggests that for some, history isn't on the land, it's in the sea. And that's exactly what we're going to explore. What if the sea was the very heart of history for the people of the Antilles? We'll start by breaking down this island illusion, then see how the Amerindians became masters of the waves, turning the ocean into a source of endless bounty and a superhighway that connected their world. Finally, we'll see how the sea itself became their territory.
All right, let's get into it. First, we have to tackle the old way of looking at islands. For a long time, archaeology had this very land-based point of view. And from that perspective, islands always seem a bit lacking, don't they? They're seen as isolated, cut off, maybe a little poor in resources, with the sea acting as this huge natural wall keeping everyone apart.
Okay, so now let's completely flip that perspective on its head. What if the sea wasn't a barrier, but a bridge? What if it didn't cause isolation, but connection? Suddenly, these islands aren't resource poor, they're incredibly rich when you include the sea. And the peopling of the Caribbean wasn't some accident, it was an intentional, ambitious project by some of the most skilled mariners of their time. This is the core idea, thinking of the Caribbean as a continent divided by water. Now there's a fancy term for this, but it's actually a really simple and powerful idea. It's called hypoinsularity, and all that means is low isolation. Because in the Antilles, you can often see the next island from the shore of the one you're on. It creates this incredibly connected seascape, not just a bunch of lonely rocks in the ocean. But you might be asking, how did they actually maintain all these connections? Well, it all came down to their amazing seafaring technology.
You have to remember, the first contact between the Old World and the New World was a meeting of sailors, and the Europeans were just blown away. Christopher Columbus himself couldn't believe what he was seeing, these massive, beautifully crafted canoes that could hold dozens of people.
And what's really cool is that they had specialized boats for different jobs. They had the smaller kuliala, which were perfect for fishing or just popping over to the next village along the coast. But then they had the Kanawa. These were the massive long-haul vessels, some up to 60 feet long, built for the high seas, for trade, and for moving whole communities.
And these weren't just big, clunky barges. Through what's called experimental archaeology, where scientists actually build and test replicas, we've learned they could easily cruise at about 3 to 3.5 knots.
Now, 3.5 knots might not sound like much, but think about it this way. That's as fast as a person walking at a really good clip on flat ground. Now imagine trying to walk through the dense, mountainous jungle that covers many of these islands. Suddenly, paddling that canoe looks like you're flying down a superhighway. It was just way more efficient.
So this incredible technology meant the sea wasn't just a highway, it was also a pantry. That old view of islands being resource poor completely misses the biggest resource of all, the ocean itself. When you look at the archaeological evidence, it's stunning. Marine life, fish, manatees, turtles, shellfish, you name it, made up about 40% of their diet. The sea was this massive, reliable food source, always there for them.
And they got more than just food from the sea. It was basically their hardware store, too. Giant conch shells were expertly shaped into sharp tools. Manatee and turtle bones were turned into all sorts of useful implements. Coral wasn't just for tools, but for beautiful ornaments. The sea provided for just about every aspect of their lives. So when you put it all together, masterful boats, endless food, and all these raw materials, the Caribbean Sea transforms from an empty space into a bustling superhighway for goods, people, and of course, ideas.
They established these huge, complex trade networks that crisscross the entire region. We're talking about high-quality flint from one specific island near Antigua, showing up hundreds of miles away. Precious stuff, like jadeite, greenstone, and all these semi-precious stones for beads and pendants were constantly on the move from island to island.
And it wasn't a simple A to A transaction either.
This was a sophisticated system, often working like a relay race. An object might start its journey in South America, get traded to someone in Trinidad, who then trades it up the island chain, passing through many hands before reaching its final owner, maybe way up in the greater Antilles.
So, the crucial point here is that when you start thinking this way, you have to completely redraw the map of the ancient Caribbean in your mind. The blue bits are no longer empty.
And this right here just perfectly illustrates the idea. Archaeologists found that at certain times, the culture, like their pottery styles, in northern Martinique was basically identical to the culture in southern Dominica, the very next island. But it was completely different from the culture on the other side of Dominica. The sea channel was a bridge, a unifier, while the mountains on their own island were a bigger divide.
This tells us something profound. The sea wasn't a void separating their territories. It was a central, fundamental part of their territory. Their world didn't just stop at the beach. It extended across the waves, connecting them to their neighbors and creating these vast, interconnected maritime communities.
When you start to see the sea through their eyes, it completely reframes your understanding of their entire civilization. It really challenges our own biases, our very land-based way of thinking about what makes a territory and what creates a connection. And it leaves us with this final, really fascinating question to think about. If the sea was their territory, what other empty spaces on our modern maps were once the vibrant center of a civilization? We hope that you liked today's video. Please share your comments and subscribe to explore other similar opportunities. Post your questions in the comments section for future videos.